Deng Ai was a patriotic military general and politician who loyally served the Kingdom of Wei. His contributions were great, but his bad manners and lack of grace meant people were easily put off by his demeanour. He came from humble beginnings, but eventually conquered Chengdu. By utilising a risky tactic, he officially brought an end to the Shou kingdom. In his later life, his confidence in his own righteousness to take action into his own hands for the benefit of Wei inspired him to act independently from the imperial court. His preparations to then manipulate the surrender of the Wu kingdom was accused as an act of treachery by Zhonghui and others, which led to his ultimate demise. The historian Chen Shou compliments Deng Ai as upright and strong, whilst also describing him as lacking self-awareness and being narrow-minded. Deng Ai could foresee the downfall of others, but ironically, not himself. Born in the year 197 in Jiyang County, Yiyang Commandery, Deng Ai lost his father when he was still young. At 11 years old, he and his mother moved to Runan in the year 208 to raise cattle and farm the land, possibly under order of Tao Tao, who had recently conquered the area. One day he became deeply inspired by a quote written on Chen Shi's tomb, so inspired that he wanted to change his name and risked violating a naming taboo. His mother explained to him that some of his family members had the names that he wanted, so changing it would be considered a sign of lacking respect and intelligence, to not just him, but them as well. In the coming years, Deng Ai was commanded to be a teacher of literature and philosophy with the responsibility of promoting those ideals in a county near Xuchang. As he struggled with his speech, it caused him to have a stutter, which made the task difficult for him, so he changed his job to an agricultural officer, where he oversaw the distribution of grain and animal feed. The locals felt sorry for Deng Ai due to his peasant background, so would often provide him with money whenever he was struggling, but he never really thanked them for it. He was laughed at and mocked by some one day when he pointed out to the surrounding lakes and mountains, at where he thought the best positions were for military camps. He soon received a promotion to a writing job, where he was responsible for keeping accurate records of the agriculture production. At the age of 21, Deng Ai and a friend of his named Shi Bao were tasked with escorting Guo Xuanxing to his court trial. The pair were quite close to Guo Xuanxing, who was an acquaintance of a rebel named Ji Ben, and so was implicated in the crime as well. On the way to court, Guo Xuanxing mentioned how the pair of them would go on to be capable officers. Deng Ai was soon promoted to the Agricultural Officer of Merit. Deng Ai held this position for the next 17 to 21 years, until he was sent to Luoyang as a messenger somewhere in his 40s. He happened upon Sima Yi, who quickly became impressed with Deng Ai's work and so recruited him and gave him the role of Gentleman of Writing. Wei's objective at this time was to focus on stockpiling food supplies for the inevitable campaigns against their rivals, Shou and Wu. So Deng Ai was sent to assess the soil in the lands from areas around Xuchang southward to the areas around Sichuan. Deng Ai came back with a written proposal known as the Discussion on the River. It states how the Tongjian system that Tao Tao's government brought back into popularity was still in use throughout the Central Plains, even though the area is now at peace. The Tongjian system involves military soldiers farming the land whilst away on expedition or off-duty to lower food consumption. Deng Ai goes on to criticise that half of the Wei army's manpower is being used for transporting supplies every time war breaks out near Wu. So he proposed that they redirect the river flow towards the more fertile lands near the upper part of the Huai River and focus on farming these lands more, whilst at the same time allowing access for boats. He went on to predict that in a time frame of 6 to 7 years they could accumulate enough grain to feed 100,000 men for 15 years. Sima Yi became very impressed and so brought his ideas into reality. This project was completed 2 years later and proved to be very successful. Every time a battle broke out against Wu, the Wei army could quickly sail down the river to counter them. This was made even easier due to the stockpiled food upstream. Deng Ai soon became a military advisor to Guo Huai and was assigned as the administrator of Nan'an Commandery. In the year 249, Jiang Wei launched his fourth northern campaign, where Deng Ai followed Guo Huai into battle to resist the Shu invaders. After their victory in battle against Jiang Wei, Guo Huai marched west to quell the Xiang tribes, but Deng Ai cautioned him that the enemy has not retreated far and could return. So Deng Ai waited for 3 days, and then Liu Hua arrived to engage him. Deng Ai knew that he only had a few men and the best course to survive was to retreat across the river without building a bridge and hold off Liu Hua there. He also knew that Jiang Wei would know this, and so deduced that Liu Hua was a distraction to keep him busy. Deng Ai concluded the most logical position for Jiang Wei to capture would be Tao Cheng, and so immediately dispatched troops to reinforce that position before retreating to the safe position across the river. Deng Ai's brilliant thinking and quick action saved Tao Cheng from falling. This earned him a promotion, a secondary marquis status, and he was also assigned as the administrator of Chengyang Commandery. During this period, there was a growing threat in the north. The Xiongnu prince Liu Bao was officially a vassal of the Wei government, although the reality of the situation would suggest otherwise. Reports of massing soldiers in Bing province and preparations for war compelled Deng Ai to write to the imperial court to voice his thoughts on the matter. He described the Xiongnu people as barbaric. As they grow in power, they grow in violence. When they are weak, they pledge for allegiance. He criticizes past dynasties for dealing with them incorrectly, evident by the wars that they had with them. Deng Ai suggested to continue the method of separating the leadership of the Xiongnu people and also reward them for past deeds. The Xiongnu leader had been living in the capital all this time, whilst his son Liu Bao grows more powerful and more impatient as he cannot inherit his father's lands. Deng Ai suggested to honour Liu Bao with a promotion and a title, and then to relocate him to Yanmen Pass. Deng Ai pushed for the idea to slowly segregate the Xiongnu people from the rest of the Han Chinese people, and in time install moral values such as integrity into them to prevent unlawful behaviour, therefore making them easier to control. This proposal was accepted by the General-in-Chief Sima Shi, who then assigned Deng Ai to be the administrator of Runan, the city he grew up in. Once back at Runan, he sought out an old fellow who had once helped his father years ago, but unfortunately he had already passed away. Deng Ai honoured his tomb and gifted the man's mother, whilst also recruiting his son as an accountant. During Deng Ai's time administrating Runan, the basic needs of the people and soldiers were always met, but there was a decline in prosperity, which led to an increase in barren, unused land. Sun Quan had passed away by now. One of his favoured officers named Declercq took control of the Wu government and forced his people into a continued war against Wei. Declercq lost a battle at Hefei, whereafter Deng Ai predicted his downfall and death, citing that he would now more than ever be an enemy of his own people. Paired with his lack of understanding of how much trouble he was in, meant his death was imminent. Deng Ai was appointed as the inspector of Yan province and promoted to general who inspires might, once Declercq returned to Wu and was put to death alongside his family, thus confirming Deng Ai's prediction as correct. Deng Ai then wrote a memorial to the imperial court where he details the direction he wishes to take regarding war and policy. He articulates the importance of food supplies to a wealthy state, and goes on to say the current system of meritoriously rewarding deeds under his supervision will take an emphasis on food collection and distribution. He believed that if there was nobody there to enforce equal distribution of the food, then it would be done unjustly, which will hinder trade in the long run. This leads to a wealthy and prosperous state becoming isolated and poor. A few years ago, in 249, Sima Yi launched a coup against the Wei government. He swiftly eliminated his political enemies, consolidated his power in the capital, whilst also removing corrupt ministers from power and replacing them with more deserving ones. 5 years later, his first son Sima Shi deposed of the Wei Emperor Tao Fang and replaced him with the 14-year-old Tao Mao. This act shook the loyalty of many generals and officials of the Tao Wei state. Guan Xiujian and Wen Xin were two such men, who decided to secretly muster a force together to revolt against the Sima clan. They asked Zhuge Dan to increase drafting and levies on the people in Yu province, but he found it awfully suspicious, saw their true intentions, and then had the messenger executed. News of this soon reached the Wu capital. Sun Liang, the current Wu emperor, sent soldiers to reinforce Guan Xiujian and Wen Xin's ranks, who then began their revolt. Sima Shi, Hu Zun, Deng Ai, and Zhuge Dan combined their armies and then marched towards the rebels. The Wei inspector of Jing province, Wang Ji, was ordered to capture Nandun quickly. The combined Wei army's movements confused and lowered the morale of the rebels, not to mention many of their families lived in the Hua River region, which led to many deserting the cause in order to guarantee the safety of their loved ones. Wen Xin fell for Sima Shi's ploy to lure him into attacking a nearby city. Deng Ai was sent with minimal troops to defend it, while Sima readied an ambush attack. Wen Xin sent his son Wen Yang to engage the enemy, who was overwhelmed by the 100,000 Wei troops. He bravely fought on despite his father retreating the following morning after learning of how large the Wei force was. The second rebellion of Sichuan came to an end soon after this minor engagement. In November of the year 255, Deng Ai was sent to assist in the defence of Dedao against Jiang Wei's invading Shu force. The arrival of Wei reinforcements drove Jiang Wei into retreat, where most of the Wei officers believed that the threat was over. Deng Ai disagreed by stating, "The defeat at the west of the Tao River wasn't an insignificant loss. The loss of troops and officers, depletion of stores and reserves, and displacement of refugees are signs pointing towards imminent destruction. I shall explain the situation. First, the enemy is riding on a wave of victories, while we're actually weak. Second, the enemy forces are well trained and battle ready, while ours are newly recruited and not well equipped. Third, the enemy is less tired than us because we travel by land whilst they travel by boat. Fourth, the enemy focuses on attacking Dedao only, whilst we spread our defences across 4 locations: Dedao, Longxi, Nan'an, and Mount Qi. Fifth, Nan'an and Longxi have grain produced by the Xiang people, while there are fields of wheat beyond Mount Qi. The enemy is cunning. They'll definitely come for the wheat." Jiang Wei did indeed come back a few months later to attack Mount Qi, but could not break through the defences that Deng Ai had prepared earlier. The two repositioned their armies. Deng Ai went to Mount Wucheng, whilst Jiang Wei stationed at Dong village. Here, Jiang Wei tried to seize the high ground from Deng Ai, but failed, so was forced to ambitiously try to cross a river to attack Tian Shui. Deng Ai simply led his men down from the mountain and defeated Jiang Wei's men, forcing him to retreat for good this time. Deng Ai was promoted to the general who guards the west and enfeoffed as the Marquis of Deng after this performance, whilst also being put in command of military affairs in Longyu. The Wei Imperial Edict credits Deng Ai for his well-planned strategies that led to the deaths of tens of thousands of Shu soldiers, whilst also striking fear into the region. It wasn't long until Zhuge Dan started a rebellion in Sichuan, so Jiang Wei launched another expedition northwards. He raided a section of the Great Wall which stored many supplies, as it was now lightly defended due to the manpower from Guangzhong being sent to Sichuan. Sima Wang and Deng Ai soon caught up to and surrounded Jiang Wei, who stationed his army with its back facing a mountain. After months of Jiang Wei and Deng Ai waiting for the other to make the first move, the Wei forces eventually forced Jiang Wei to withdraw, after giving strict orders to their men not to move nor engage him and to ignore all of his taunts and insults. There was one last victory for Deng Ai before the conquest of Shu began. He was stationed at Huhe County when Jiang Wei attacked his location but was soundly defeated and driven to retreat to Tazhong. After this battle, Sima Zhao, who was the regent of the Tao Wei state, noted how Shu must be weak after all of their failed northern campaigns and grew tired of the constant warring, so decided to launch a large-scale invasion of Shu. Of all of his advisors, only Zhonghui agreed that it was best to deal with Shu first, making note of the 6 years of training and preparation that their armies had, while Shu's supplies suffered year by year. He suggested to keep Jiang Wei busy at Tazhong so he cannot interfere with the main force, whilst they march for Luo Valley and then into Hanzhong. He then noted that Liu Shan's ineptness as a ruler will guarantee the surrender of Shu at this point. Deng Ai himself voiced strong opinions objecting to the invasion of Shu. Although it is not recorded what he said, his views could be a result of what he had recently dreamt one night. He was sitting atop a mountain with water flowing near him. He asked a Wei official named Yuan Shou, who was well versed in the Yi Jing, also known as the Book of Changes, as to what the deeper meaning was to his dream. The Book of Changes is an ancient Chinese text in which the authors use hexagrams to discuss cosmic patterns in correlation to the relationship between humanity and nature. Yuan Shou answered that in accordance to the hexagrams, flowing water is beneficial to the southwest, but not to the northeast. Deng Ai felt depressed after hearing this, as to him it meant that after he marches southwest to Shu, he will not be allowed to return home in the northeast. Sima Zhao was worried that Deng Ai's influence could affect the people's willingness to fight, and so commissioned a close official of his to serve as a major under Deng Ai, with a secret task to aggressively change Deng Ai's mind on the matter. Deng Ai then agreed to Wei's three-pronged attack into Shou, and was given 30,000 men to attack Jiangwei at Taichung, whilst at the same time, Zhuge Xu was sent to block Jiangwei's retreat route. Deng Ai split his unit into three. One unit marched for Jiangwei, another assisted them by clearing a path through the terrain, whilst the third unit engaged some of Jiangwei's men near Gansong. Hanzhong soon fell to Zhonghui, which caused Jiangwei to march back towards Shou. Deng Ai's third unit routed Jiangwei at a river crossing, which forced him into retreat. As Zhuge Xu was guarding the bridge back into Shou, Jiangwei led his men down an alternate path through a valley, but quickly turned around. Zhuge Xu then left his position to try and block the valley instead, but Jiangwei had already turned back and managed to cross the bridge one day before Zhuge Xu learned of this and got back there again. Jiangwei quickly marched to Jiangyi Pass, where he was attacked by Zhonghui's men several times, but his defences were too tight. Deng Ai proposed to press their attack. He laid out plans for a shortcut that leads from Yinping through Diyang village into Fu County, the heartland of Shou. He quoted Sun Tzu's Art of War here by stating, "Attack the enemy where they are unprepared, and appear where you are not expected." And he wanted to take only the most athletic and capable men to form a crack unit of elite soldiers. Zhonghui was very impressed with this and even assigned his own subordinate officer Tian Zhang to accompany Deng Ai on his mission. The shortcut was just over 200 miles long, through dangerous mountain terrain, so numerous bridges needed to be constructed across the valleys. He had to lead his men up trees and cliff faces in single file, so the journey was a difficult one. 3 separate groups of Shu ambush attacks showed up, which forced Deng Ai's subordinate Tian Shu to disobey commands and halt his advance. Deng Ai wanted to execute Tian Shu for this, but spared him in the end. He instead gave command of the vanguard to Tian Zhang, which enabled them to force their way through. They appeared at Jiangyu, and immediately received the surrender of its administrator, Ma Miao. Zhuge Zhan was in charge of the area's defences, and so led his men from Fu County to Mianzhu, where they clashed with Deng Ai's elite unit. Deng Ai ordered his son, Den Zhong, to attack the enemy's right flank, whilst Shi Juan attacked the enemy's left flank, but they were both defeated. They returned and claimed that the enemy simply cannot be defeated, which caused Deng Ai to lose his temper. He wanted to execute the pair of them and stated, "This battle will determine if we live or die. What do you mean the enemy cannot be defeated?" The pair of them hastily rallied their men for another attack, but this time they managed to defeat Zhuge Zhan, killing him and his subordinates, Zhuge Shang and Zhuge Jun. Deng Ai marched on towards Chengdu, but he encountered an emissary sent by Liu Shan at Luo County, which announced Shu's surrender. As he entered Chengdu, he met with around 60 Shu nobles and Liu Shan, who had tied himself up. First, Deng Ai released Liu Shan from captivity. Next, he ordered that daily activities should continue as normal, and finally, he outlawed pillaging of the city. This greatly impressed many old Shu officials who were allowed to keep their old positions. Deng Ai also used his imperial authority to promote Liu Shan as the general of chariots. In the coming months, Deng Ai's ego and arrogance grew. He constructed a memorial to his victory over Zhuge Zhan, whilst also making funeral arrangements for the fallen Wei and Shu soldiers to be buried side by side. The old Shu officials lost some respect for him on one occasion after he boastfully remarked how Jiangwei was a short-lived hero, and that he pales in comparison to himself. He went on to state how lucky the Shu officials were to have encountered him and not somebody more cruel. He was soon praised by the imperial court for his conquest of Shu, and he was elevated to the position of Grand Commandant, with 20,000 more taxable households added onto his marquis state. Deng Ai wrote a letter to Sima on how to best deal with the last remaining rival state of Wu. He suggested to shower Liu Shan in luxuries, to show off how well treated Wei's old enemies are. Deng Ai goes on to say that Liu Shan should be titled as the Prince of Fu Feng, and that they can convert Dong Zhuo's old residence to be Liu Shan's new estate. He wanted to also bestow titles onto Liu Shan's children, whilst also creating new estates in preparation for any Wu officers that were enticed into surrendering. Deng Ai also proposed to build up military might and many boats ready to sail into Wu. The longer Wu wait, the less chance of victory they will have, and will surely surrender to Wei without a fight. Sima Zhao submitted Deng Ai's proposal to the imperial court for further consideration before it was implemented. This made Deng Ai impatient, as he saw it as a massive waste of their time. He would rant and argue over this topic many times with other Wei officers. He would quote the Spring and Autumn Annals, where it says an officer can act in an authoritarian manner when in distant lands so long as his actions benefit the state. Zhonghui, Hu Lai, and Shi Zhuan, and many others agreed that Deng Ai's disrespect of the imperial court was a sign of treachery, and it was likely to start a rebellion. As Sima Zhao and Deng Ai discussed policy through letters, Zhonghui intercepted one of them and mimicked Deng Ai's handwriting so he came across as arrogant and demanding, whilst also burning one of Sima Zhao's, so it seemed Deng Ai had ignored it. In late February in 264, Wei Guan and Zhonghui marched into his camp at Chengdu, ordered his men to put down their weapons, and placed him under arrest. Deng Ai was put in a cart and shipped off to the capital. Almost immediately after this, Zhonghui started a mutiny at Chengdu and laid out plans to conquer Luoyang. His plans failed, which led to old subordinates of Deng Ai's chasing after him to try save their old master. They successfully caught up with and freed him, and so headed back to Chengdu, but Wei Guan heard about this and sent Tianshu to attack him. Deng Ai and his sons were intercepted west of Mianzhu by Tianshu, and they were all killed. His other sons in Luoyang were also rounded up and killed, whilst the rest of his family were exiled out westward. In the year 265, when the Jin dynasty took over the Wei regime, Emperor Wu pardoned Deng Ai in his decree, which allowed his family to return home. The emperor stated the redeeming factor was that Deng Ai didn't resist arrest and came quietly. Some point in between the years 275 and 280, Fan Zheng, an officer who had previously served under Deng Ai, spoke with Emperor Wu about him, but he became very emotional as he recalled how loyal Deng Ai was to Wei. In later years, the Xiang tribes rebelled once again in Liang and killed the Jin inspector of the area. Many Jin officials and nobles found safety in the defensive structures that Deng Ai had constructed whilst he was stationed there. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.